started very soon. I do want to point out that we have a little bit of food over here, some bagels and some muffins. So if any of you need a little mid-morning snack, I encourage you to do so. So good morning. My name's Sally Scott. I am the co-chair with Christy Nabin Warren. Where's Christy? Right there, of the Obermann Center Working Group on Place-Based Inclusion, and we organized this event today. And I really want to thank so many people for coming. This is a fantastic turnout. And I think what we're seeing in this audience is really a great mix of university and community. And that's the whole point of this event, is to think about those two and how they interact. I want to thank our sponsors for this event. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, represented here by Marva Williams, who will be moderating. The University Office of Outreach and Engagement, you met some of those lovely folks on your way in. And the Obermann Center, which has been supporting our group since the beginning of the academic year. We also have many wonderful co-sponsors who helped get the word out about the event, and I want to give them credit. That includes the School of Social Work, the College of Public Health, the School of Urban and Regional Planning, the Recreational Services, the Hillel, the University of Iowa, the Department of Sociology, and a favorite of mine, the Johnson County Affordable Homes Coalition. Before we begin, I'd like to put this event in a little bit of context. I think many of us would agree that the Iowa City area is in many ways a wonderful place to live. It's economically and culturally really vibrant, and it's very active socially and politically. I mean, you're all here today. But because a lot of people want to study here and live here and work here, there is a tremendous shortage of affordable housing, and particularly for folks with lower incomes. About 80% of households that earn less than $35,000 a year are paying more than 30% of their income on housing. I want to say that again because it's kind of a remarkable thing. All households earning $35,000 or less, about 80% of them are having trouble affording their housing. They're paying more than 30%. And that leaves less money for health care, education, clothing, all the things that a family needs. In addition, segregation by race and class appears to be on the upswing. Certainly there are statistical measures showing that segregation of African Americans in Iowa City has been increasing. And I think we all want to avoid creating areas of concentrated poverty, because we know from numerous examples around the country that that doesn't work out well with the families who live there, or really for the community as a whole. So today, some of the questions we're asking our speakers to think about and you to think about is what is the role of the University of Iowa in addressing some of the critical concerns of this community? And what can happen when a university really positions itself as an anchor institution? And we'll hear some examples from other parts of the country. And what are the potential benefits, I think, both to the university and to the community of the university becoming more engaged in critical community issues? So to shed light on these questions, we've asked two speakers, David Perry, University of Illinois at Chicago, and Craig Taylor, who is currently the head of Community Planning Economic Development for the city of Minneapolis, but 16 years prior worked for the University of Minnesota, to talk about this. And I want to invite Marva Williams of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago to introduce our speakers, maybe introduce a little bit about the Federal Reserve Bank's role in this event.
Good morning, everyone. I am so happy to be here. This conference, or this meeting today, is actually the culmination of several years of work. A couple of years ago, the Federal Reserve Bank and the FDIC, and my colleague Kevin Shields is here, as well as the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, we came to Iowa City and we offered 3 workshops to community-based organizations on working more effectively with financial institutions. And while we were here, we learned about some of the challenges of the community, and one of those challenges is affordable housing. And so the Federal Reserve Bank is happy to help to convene this meeting to talk about a really important issue in Iowa City. So thank you all for coming. And I want to let you know that we have publications in the rear of the room that are provided by the Community Development and Policy Studies Division at the Federal Reserve Bank. And I hope that you will please take those to read later. And if you're interested in receiving further editions of that publication, you can do that on the internet. I'd be very happy to provide more information if you would like. And you should know I'm not taking them home, so please help yourself. So I just want to say a couple introductory remarks about the importance of anchor institutions like the University of Iowa. Anchor institutions like universities, hospitals, museums, and even some firms are a very important source of resources, and I don't just mean financial resources. I mean leadership and support on some of the critical issues in urban communities, including small business development, economic development, promotion of minority and women-owned businesses, as well as affordable housing. And although affordable housing might be a major area that we will talk about today and will be considered in the future, there are other areas where the university could also play a bigger role in community development. As you all know, there are increasing enrollment at the University of Iowa, and those students are not provided housing. The majority of them are not provided housing by the university. And so they are competing on the private market for housing throughout the city. And so that demand, increasing demand for housing and the willingness of students to group together and to live with roommates is increasing demand for housing. What does that mean? Private developers and others, some of them are providing very good and stable housing for students, and many others are not. And so these families, lower income families, are then competing with students for modest rental housing in the region. This area is also growing, in part because of the university, and in part because it's part of a bigger region, reaching all the way to Cedar Rapids, and people may live in Iowa City and work in Cedar Rapids and the reverse, and so this is a growing region. And so housing costs are increasing as a result of that, but wages are fairly stagnant. And so, as Sally mentioned, not only are lower income people dealing with a cost burden, but many modest and middle income people are also faced with the same kind of cost burden. So I'd like to introduce our speakers, and I'm so happy that they were able to come today. These are experts on university partnerships and anchor partnerships. Our first speaker is Dr. David Perry, and he is a professor of urban planning and policy at the University of Illinois at Chicago. For 12 years, Dr. Perry headed the Great Cities Institute, which is a very integral organization in Chicago and throughout the country, researching community development practices. And Dr. Perry has also done quite a bit of research on university partnerships, and his presentation today will review some of those. And I have to say, I'm so impressed. Dr. Perry has written over 150 articles. So your fingers must be very sore. And several books on violence, contested cities, public infrastructure, and other kinds of practices in community development and urban planning. Our second speaker is Craig Taylor. Craig is from Minneapolis, and he is the Director of Community and Economic Development at the city. But prior to that, as Sally mentioned, he worked for the University of Minnesota. And there he was involved with the Office for Business and Community Economic Development. And much of his work there was to promote opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses to actually engage in university activities. So I'd like to start with David, and then we'll move on to Craig's presentation. And then I have a couple of questions, perhaps, to begin our discussion, and I'm hoping that you will have questions as well. Thank you.
First, I want to take the opportunity to thank everyone for coming. I know it's a lot to ask of you to come and listen to an academic talk, and I really appreciate it. And secondly, I want to thank Dr. Marva Williams of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, Sally Scott, who I have listed as part of the Center for Public Policy, and also Christy from the Religion Department at the university for taking the time to invite me today. I really appreciate it. Secondly, I want to begin with a caveat. I said that I'm an academic. I'm not an expert. You're the experts. You are the doers. Each of you could provide me with more than enough case studies to fill another book. My oldest son immediately says, Dad, if you write another book, as Marva was saying, it'll be too soon. So all the observation and evaluation and analysis I give right now could be given by you. And so therefore, I ask you not to compare what I'm going to do today, to compare Chicago or Columbus, Ohio, with the campus town of the University of the University of Iowa and Iowa City. But I would really ask you to just basically try and relate where you can. And that's all I ask. You're the doers, and I will learn a lot from you over the next few hours, and I really appreciate you inviting me. Thirdly, or fourthly, I guess I would like to say that the title up there says Place-Based Anchor Institution. A place-based institution anchors a city. That's what it does. The academic question is whether or not what we do is foundational to what is going on or not. If it is not foundational to the development of the city, and that's the community development part, the second part of the title, then quite frankly, it's not an anchor institution in my book. You know, for generations we have had institutions, universities have not been foundational to their communities. Let's be very straight about it. And frankly, I want to talk about foundational institutions, and universities can be foundational. The University of Iowa can be foundational to Iowa City. It's just going to be different than other cities. And that's why I ask you to relate and not compare. Fifthly, I would say that for everyone here, you all know what an anchor institution is. I got into this business because another academic said that Cleveland and Akron and Buffalo and other cities all had universities and all were anchor institutions. I found out that what most of them did was that the universities weren't going anywhere. They were the last institution standing. What was happening was that in Cleveland or Akron or Buffalo or Syracuse or the rest of Western New York for that matter, upstate New York included, there was really very little going on. We were the last institution standing. We were not anchoring change. We were not anchoring development. We were doing very little that was foundational to the communities. And so I'm interested in those institutions that are fully vested, urban place-based institutions that are engaged in the political, the economic, and the community features of a community. I'm really interested in that. And if you're not fully vested in the community, if the University of Iowa is not fully vested in this community of the universe then it should be. Because, and if it isn't, then you should take steps to make it much more foundational. You know, I've done a lot of research, but and most academics would get up and give you a whole bunch of case studies. I'm going to give you the conclusions, and that's it. First of all, if a university is really, hi Chuck, I want to know whether or not that student is applying to the University of Illinois at Chicago as well.
No pressure.
No pressure at all. Chuck Connolly is a colleague of mine, along with Jim Throgmorton, who are both colleagues of mine that I've known for many, many years in the planning profession. And so therefore I have to single them out. And I will do that. And I will not say any more because I'll just get in trouble. The campus isn't a campus anymore. When we were in urban planning school many, many years ago, the campus was. We would simply plan the campus as if it were a standalone operation. It's much more than that. The campus today, the university, I walk around this university, and Craig and I were talking about it yesterday. You can't tell the difference between the University of Iowa and Iowa City. They basically blend. The campus isn't a campus anymore. It's much more. The second thing is that universities used to develop things only independent of everything else. They used to do it alone. They used to go it alone. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But today, more and more of the buildings of a university are mixed use. They're blurring academic and commercial uses. They're at the edge of the campus. But even the meaning of university building is changing. And I suggest to you today that university buildings are urban buildings. They're not simply buildings that were built to be on the campus as opposed to off the campus. And lastly, you can't, and I've talked to Jim Throgmorton in his new role as mayor, you can't talk about a campus master plan as if it is not also a city master plan. In other words, it's an urban plan. And we should start to think of it that way. The next thing that I would do is that I would go a little deeper. You know, every academic has to go a little deeper. And so I want to talk about universities doing three things. I want to talk about them as anchors, but not as anchors in standalone situations. They're anchors. They are place-based collaborators with other urban institutions. They can't do it alone. I went out to dinner with a university president recently, and he knows the governor. He knows the senators. He knows the state representatives. He knows the mayor, Jim. He knows them all. But he continues to try and do things alone. And he's getting nothing done. He said, I know all these people. I even bicycle with half of them. And yet, I can't get anything done. He can't do it alone. He needs all those people at the federal and the state and at the regional level. And I'm looking at Megan. And the second thing is that you need 360 degrees of development. A University of Iowa cannot simply be a single planning agency anymore. It has to be a neighbor. It has to be a planner. It has to be an entrepreneur. And it has to do it all at the same time, dear hearts. And so an example might be Atlanta or Columbus or Tacoma. And I'll try and get to those. And then finally, universities have to be community-based, place-based. They are, if they are going to do anything that's foundational to this community, if the University of Iowa is going to do anything that really relates to Iowa City, then it's going to have to be a community-based entity. Let's move back and talk about a couple of examples. I would be remiss if I didn't. Marva's asked me to. You know. And so the first thing is that universities are anchors or collaborators. Universities are place-based collaborators with other institutions, and they cannot do it alone. The president of the University of Iowa cannot do it all by himself, no matter what you think of him. The Central Area Plan, I want to talk about a spot in Chicago. The Loop, has anyone here been to Chicago? You've all been to Chicago. And in the Loop, has anyone been in the Loop? My wife says we live in a little village called the Loop. The case of Chicago is that I want to talk about is not a case where the campus planner started to do anything. It was a desolate hole in the donut that really that one part of the Loop, that is the southern part of the Loop, continued to be without merit. Economic development planners, economic development planning, all of the community development planning, I'm looking at Craig, all of that went awry. The city of Chicago's Central Area Plan in 1991 finally gave up. The city and the campus development, both anchored by a city-university collaborations, created a different model. And so the outcome, and I wanted to get to the outcome right now, is that inter-university collaboration plus the private sector plus the city, not doing it alone, created the first 24/7 environment known as Loop U in this global city. Now, all of you have been to Chicago, so you all know this is Grant Park, and this is the place where everyone was bailing out. We could not get any economic development to work. So the universities engaged in a new model. And the new model was described by the new model was one that would be housed by DePaul University. Anyone here who is a representative of DePaul?
No, I went there for...
What?
I went there for undergrad.
Oh, good. Well, anyway, so DePaul University has a place called the DePaul Center. And the DePaul Center it created almost all of the model that we want, that I wanted. The Goldblatt department store was a deserted signature of a deserted economic development environment. This is a building. This is a building that, in essence, stands physically as the design model for what not to do in economic development planning. The city owned it, but it could not turn it into the new Harold Washington Public Library. Why? Because the building was built to house clothes, not books. The engineers told us it would collapse. So pigeons moved in. And they left it that way. And the pigeons stayed there until the city was finally able to find a taker, DePaul University. The city wanted to revitalize the district. It finally, as part of a new city area plan, not presented by academics, by the way, but by planners in the city hall, the city and the city was able to guarantee that the university would come in and build a 24/7 environment. But it wasn't going to be as easy as it looked. The university needed $62 billion to revitalize it, and they needed tax money. They created tax money with 2 floors of retail. 2 floors of City Hall were then guaranteed. So it was a leaseback situation where the city no longer had to build a new building, but it could renovate that old building in such a way that 2 floors could be turned over into its Department of Housing. And finally, the last 5 stories, the last 40% are DePaul University's Graduate Center. You could have gone to graduate school there too, but you didn't. The second, DePaul was so successful at doing this that the city was so successful in terms of its model for doing it, that it was able to turn around and say that the next thing we'll do is that we will build a dormitory. A dormitory that DePaul said would fill 670 beds. The city said no. We want all these universities, public and private, to be working together. And so we built the University Center. The University Center is a building that now houses 1,700 rooms, and it also houses 4 different universities work together, and each year they get together to house and rehouse their student population. Each one has a strategic plan for residential students, but each one can accomplish it with now the largest university center in the United States. Again, it's a mixed use, and it's mixed use because the bottom 2 floors are taxable, which I happen to agree with, and I almost got written down on a rail for doing it the last time, for talking about it. And so now we have a situation, and I'll come to an end, where there is a 24/7 environment. It's no longer a desolate hole in the donut. There are 25 different public and private universities working together. Over the next 10 years, it's projected, Loop U is projected to move to 95,000 students. A projected increase in employment of 22,000 employees. A projected employment, or a base of physical base of 1.5 million visitors a year, 35 million in 35 million annually, going up to 1.5 billion in business values, and therefore the beat goes on. The next position that we want to make is that of 360 degrees of development. The university, and I want to take us from a large university experience down to Atlanta, Georgia. And I want to move to Atlanta, Georgia, where Morehouse College, with neighborhood revitalization on its mind, and enlightened self-interest on its agenda, was able to move from a long-time economic and physical decline with an equally long-term history of Morehouse acting like an enclave rather than a neighbor in pure pastoral settings, to revitalization. The goal is to revitalize the surrounding residential area of Morehouse with limited funds, that has no endowment, and even less community trust. The community doesn't care about Morehouse. And Morehouse, frankly, doesn't care about the neighborhoods. And so basically, the goal of Morehouse is to revitalize the surrounding area when you don't have those funds, when you don't have that endowment, when you don't have community trust. And so basically, in this particular case, we set up a CDC that led to an affordable housing effort with the university as a co-equal partner. Morehouse basically was able to create a situation where around its base, it was able to, through enlightened self-interest, swap land that was for mixed-use development, academic and development uses. Columbus, Ohio is another example. Columbus, Ohio has a plan where it titled the University Neighborhoods Revitalization Plan. And in essence, it created a situation where there was an improvement in rental housing, it increased home ownership, and it revitalized the retail market. Again, Megan talked a little bit about regionalism. I would suggest that we can create, with 1,300, there are 1,300 scattered sites and regional sites, and I think Columbus, Ohio is something for you to look at. It also was created with the Ohio State University, and it also is it is created with a campus partnership model of an intermediary. Tacoma, Washington is another model, with 360 degrees of development, where the University of Washington moved into Tacoma and set up an entire new campus. It didn't create one new building. It didn't have to. It just took the warehouses and the anchor of downtown development and created a new mixed-use campus all the way along the way. Today, the University of Washington at Tacoma has 3,400 to 3,500 students, and there are 57 different majors. I want to close with the university as a community-based institution. There are indeed the employee-assisted housing, or EAH. There's 4 different models that I will talk about in the question and answer period, if you're so inclined, to talk about financial partners, service provider model, a connector facilitator model, and a development model, which is a blend of the core. There's also basically, I don't know if there's a way in which almost 50% of all public research universities, including the University of Iowa, report a decrease in crime due to an increase in public safety services that the city the city gets from the university and the university gets from the city. And finally, I want to talk about education. 85% of the universities we have studied have community-based K through 16 partnership models. Again, it's not a model where the university can do it alone. The university does it in a reciprocal relationship. Let me just close with this. In the United States, in particular, leadership matters. And if you don't have leadership at the highest level of a university, you will always end up with some form of gerrymandered situation. Fiscal independence does not carry it anymore. But increasingly, as the president once said, he cannot do it alone. Public-private partnerships that create new collaborative strategies like the University of Illinois model and the University Center model in Chicago creates mixed-use buildings where taxes are part of the picture. Almost every building that is built these days now is created with a mixed-use intermediary of one sort or another. And let's face it, the University of Iowa usually doesn't do anything when its self-interest is not definitely involved. So enlightened self-interest is indeed an organizing principle. Having said all that, I know I've gotten over my time, but I certainly appreciate what you had to say.
Wow. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Morning. 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 Let me just say that it's an honor and a privilege to be here today. Thank you so much, Sally. Thank you for inviting me. Very much appreciated. I haven't been in Iowa City in over 20 years. I had a cousin that went to school and graduated from the university here. And I have some fond memories of this place on many levels, but it's changed significantly since the last time I was here in a very positive way. Again, I want to thank all of you for taking time, certainly out of your busy schedule, to be here this morning to join us for this event. Today, I'm going to take the opportunity, if I may, to put on my university hat. Again, right now I work for the mayor, just recently appointed about 15 months ago as the executive director for the Department of Community Planning and Economic Development. Prior to that, I worked for the University of Minnesota for 16 years as the executive director of the Office for Business and Community Economic Development and the Business and Technology Center. So I have a long history, of course, with the university and really working in the community, involved in community-university partnerships. And so much of what I will say, or pretty much all of what I will say today is framed around that experience. I would like to preface my conversation or my remarks this morning based on, I thought, some really good questions that Sally posed in an email to myself and my colleague David and Lucy several weeks ago, a couple months ago. And so let me just, if I may, just share those. The first question was, what is or should be the motivation of universities to address their community's inclusive development issues? The second question was, how have other universities addressed racial and economic disparities in their own communities? And the third question was, what are the organizational structures for involving university and community representatives in addressing these issues, and what works and why? And so I'm going to frame my again, comments and remarks kind of in response to those three, I think, very, very critical questions. Let me begin by saying that while the broader influence of urban universities on the regional economy is becoming much better understood, its role in challenged areas, distressed areas where there have been market failures and disinvestment is still relatively unexplored. More importantly, I think we all know that the academic and operating activities of a university, particularly an urban university, can significantly impact revitalization in these types of areas. I think, as an example, the University of Minnesota, and I mentioned this earlier, is really an enduring component of Minnesota's urban economy. It is the economic engine of the state, and it really recognizes that role, and it sees itself as a leader in enhancing urban vitality and supporting many of the elements associated with a vibrant inner city and healthy economy. And so the university also understands, the University of Minnesota also understands that its own health and success is inextricably linked to the health and success of its surrounding community. And so over time, the University of Minnesota began to appreciate the value and importance of civic engagement and collaboration. And as it thought more about that, I think over time, that helped the university to understand that if it were going to drive transformational change in challenged areas and addressing racial economic disparities, that it was really going to have to stretch beyond the traditional faculty and community service boundaries to do some really different things, some really unique things, some really innovative things, some really out-of-the-box things. Again, this is based on my history at the university. I firmly believe that urban institutions should be supporting economic development and community building by leveraging their assets and resources to have long-term sustainable outcomes and impact in their community. In my mind, effective community development is really the ability to strengthen the existing assets and capacity of a community. It's really, really fundamentally all it is. And one of the I think important keys in community regeneration is the ability to build upon the existing resources that a community already has in its control, and also harnessing those that are still not quite yet ready for or available for development purposes. So I'm going to change gears here. And I mentioned this earlier in our earlier meeting. Members of the community posed a really interesting question for the university back in 2003, 2004, and specifically to then President Robert Brunings. And that question really kind of put the university, again, as I mentioned earlier, on its heels. Someone asked the university, what is the university's urban agenda? You're right in the heart of the community. You bump up against a couple of really challenged areas. The campus sprawls across some of the inner city areas. What is the university's urban agenda? We don't understand how the university is really being deliberate and intentional in interacting with the inner city community that it's a part of. And so from that, President Brunix commissioned the Urban Task Force. I was on that task force with my boss, Senior Vice President Robert Jones, to start thinking. A lot of great conversation, a lot of great ideas emerged from that task force, but one really provocative idea that we kind of moved forward with, and I'll share that in a minute, but let me provide some background first. In 2004, 2005, again, my boss, former boss, Senior Vice President Robert Jones, began the long and arduous process of engaging in conversations with community leaders and community residents of North Minneapolis about the possibility of the university having a physical presence in that community. Now, North Minneapolis, keep in mind, is the most ethnically and culturally diverse community in the state of Minnesota. It also has the highest racial disparities in income, housing, education, and employment than any other community in the state of Minnesota. And so as Robert and I began these conversations initially, in our mind, we're thinking, oh, this is slam dunk. We got this. This is it. The community is going to be really excited about the university saying, we want to be in the community. We want to come and work in the community. Much to our surprise, not only did the community push back, they pushed back hard. They said to us, one, we don't want you here. You've not been a good partner to this community. We don't trust you. And third, we're not really clear that whatever you're trying to do, that it's serving your best interests or is it serving our best interests. So it became a very interesting process at that point for us. We continued to move forward because we had already begun to engage in dialogue with leaders in that community who were interested in seeing this happen. But it, ladies and gentlemen, turned into a hot mess very quickly because the community started picketing. They went to the press. The press was writing scathing articles about the university. The community talk show programs were talking about the university. I mean, it was just a mess. And then they began to attack Robert and I personally because we actually lived in that community. And we were a part of that community. People knew us. We socialized with people in that community. So they thought that we had thrown them under the bus and got behind the wheel. It was not, to talk about the lessons learned when you think about engaging with the community, got a lot of them, got a lot of lessons. And so it took us almost 2 years to eventually begin to galvanize the support. We had to go back and rethink things, went back to President Brunix because things got so bad at one point. We were like, we need to cut the cord on this. We need to let this go. This is not going to work. The community is adamant about the university not having a presence here. And so Bob, bless his heart, he's such an amazing leader. Bob said, nope, we're in this. We're going to stay the course, guys. And so Robert and I dug in our heels and went back to the table and started re-strategizing around, our engagement strategy. And so again, over a 2-year period of time, we finally began to galvanize the community, came around and said, okay, we're going to let the university come here. We want the university to come here. We understand that the university can provide significant value, and we want to take advantage of that. And so after we finally got past that monumental hurdle, we created what was called the UNP, University Northside Partnership. That was really, ladies and gentlemen, nothing more than a convening mechanism to really bring together Northside community-based organizations, faith-based leaders, city, county, state representatives, and faculty and staff from the University of Minnesota to begin to engage in collaborative conversations and strategic conversations about what would the university ultimately do, what would be its role once it had a physical presence in North Minneapolis. And so those conversations went on for a long period of time. Eventually, it led to the creation of what is called the Urban Research Outreach and Engagement Center. In other words known as UROC. UROC is a $10+ million investment in the heart of North Minneapolis. UROC, again, it reaffirms and reinvigorates the university's land grant mission for an urban age. And it also strengthens the university's long-term commitment to Minnesota's urban community. The mission of UROC is to engage the university in vital public partnership with North Minneapolis in an effort to advance learning, to promote the quality of life, to support economic and community development, and to really tackle complex contemporary problems facing that community. And so UROC itself, ladies and gentlemen, is a 23,000 square foot collaborative research space that provides an opportunity for university programs and units as well as community organizations to work together to develop programming that impacts the broader North Minneapolis community. The building provides university faculty and staff with office space to essentially house collaborative outreach and research programs that reflect community, and I want to say, again, reiterate that point, community identified priorities and programs associated with early childhood development, health and wellness, nutrition, health disparities, community and economic development, business development, technology, and many, 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 many more areas that UROC has the ability to focus in. And so UROC's presence in that community increases the university's ability to respond more quickly to the requests and the needs of that community around broad-based projects that impact that community. And it also provides the university with an opportunity, again, to leverage its assets and resources to bring its expertise to that community as well. So I don't know how time is going, but I'm just going to stop there because you know, I know there are probably questions. So Sally, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you.
So thank you very much for your presentations, and it was very interesting to hear real-life examples of university partnerships, but also sort of some of the philosophical, the background of many of those kinds of partnerships. So to get us started, I'd like to talk a little bit more about this university self-enlightenment. If you could talk a little bit more about the entire process of encouraging university officials to engage in partnerships with community organizations, with local governments and others. So what was that process? How long did that take? And what were some of the instrumental interactions involved in that?
I'll start very quickly.
Can everybody hear that, or does Marvin need to give them
And the most of the examples that I've come across really are community-based. The university has to be receptive, but without the community doing it, and without the place-based institution suggesting the way to go, without the planners, the city planners working on it, then I think there'd still be pigeons in the Gold Lab building.
Can you, for me, Barbara, please repeat the question again?
So it seems to me that what you're sort of describing is an engagement process between university officials and community residents, perhaps local businesses, the local government, planning officials. Can you describe sort of what that process was like, and if there are sort of any instrumental steps along the way that encouraged the university to fully engage in that process?
Thank you. Great question. So, you know, I think the most, again, what the University of Minnesota did with UROC was, you know, we tried to research to determine if there was another model out there, so we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. And so as we began to engage in that process with the community, we really didn't quite know what we were doing. We kind of feeling our way, and I'm just being very honest, very frank. And so when I say about the lessons learned about how to start that process of, you know, in being engaged in meaningful conversations with the community, because the University of Minnesota is such a large, powerful institution in Minnesota, we just assumed we were going to hop down there and say, hey guys, we're going to help you out. And the community said, we've been doing fine without you. And if you're going to be in this community, you're going to have to make sure that we want you here. And we have to talk more about what that's going to look like, what's it going to be. And so the UMP, as I talked about, was that convening mechanism to bring together all of the institutional partners and other players that needed to be a part of those conversations to make this work. And so, again, it was a very long and arduous process for us in kind of working with the community. And I think we learned more probably about how to do this than the community did. And we needed that lesson. It helped us put things in perspective. But, you know, as the UMP was established to help create a broad-based partnership that really brought all of these partners together to develop a shared vision, to create values and principles that were based and rooted in things that the community felt was in their best interest. And so they were very delicate conversations. We had big town hall meetings with the community. We had group meetings with the community, focus group meetings, one-on-one meetings with leaders. It was a very meticulous process. And again, it took a great deal of time to really begin to move things forward. So.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to now ask if there are any questions amongst the audience. I know some of you are community residents and students. Others of you are faculty and staff at the university. Jim.
Surprise, surprise. First, thank you for your excellent presentations. 10 days ago, your former dean, Robin Hambleton, spoke in this very room about leading the inclusive city. And his presentation focused on, as you can imagine, inclusivity, and he made some references to sustainability as well, because that's a big part of the book that he wrote titled Leading the Inclusive City. So I wanted you to know that when you connect with Robin next time, tell him hi. Okay. Sally started with affordable housing. So I want to ask you about that. We have a significant challenge here in Iowa City pertaining to affordable housing. I think you know that from conversations yesterday. And we also have a large area just to the south of our downtown. It's called the Riverfront Crossings District. The university is adding something like 500 more students each year for the next several years. They've just built one new dorm, and they have 3 new dorms under construction, 3 separate towers down by the river. But they're also demolishing an existing dorm, so the net increase in student housing on campus is really fairly small. So what we have faced for years and will face increasingly, I think, in the next year, several years, is intense pressure on off-campus student housing, which drives rents up. Sally can talk about this a lot more than I can. Drives rents up, and throughout the city, we have a vacancy rate of around 1 to 2%.
Less than 1%.
Vacancy rate. So you lose your housing. Where are you going to find a new place to live? You can see the challenge. So it's both a supply problem and an affordability problem. So I think we have a huge opportunity to collaborate with the university with regard to increasing the supply of affordable housing in Iowa City in ways that meet student demand, but also help out other residents in the city. If you have ideas about how we could do that in a way that might actually take advantage of all this land to the south of downtown that we are trying to redevelop now as part of a Riverfront Crossings District plan, I'd love to hear your ideas.
Well, I guess I'll jump in. I would actually like to hear your ideas at some point. But the one thing the 2 things that I would say, that one of the things that I've discovered over the last 10 to 11 years, well, there's 2 things. First of all, it takes leadership at the top, as I talked about. You've got to have leadership at the top. And I'm saying, and Craig said it. Craig said at one point he and Robert were ready to throw in the towel. But they went back to Bob, and Bob said, no, guys, go back out there and try again. It takes real committed leadership at the top. Number 2, one of the things that was a real problem for me is that I think that universities do 2 things that are really terrible. They have service learning, and they do outreach. I hate service learning because the people who do service learning, they don't get tenure, and the people who do research, they get tenure. And the other thing is, so it's a class system inside the academy. And outreach is that there's an international relationship problem too. And and Craig said that. They said, my God, the University of Minnesota is going to come right out there and help us out. And the neighborhood said, hey, the place-based thing said, well, hey, look it, we're doing pretty well on our own. We don't need you unless you can bring something to the table. And Bob Brixton really brought something to the table. And so I guess, Jim, I would say that until you really, and finally universities can't do it alone. The university president working together with other university presidents can create a situation where he works with he can bring the private sector, he can bring the mayor, he can bring other people to the table in ways that that Sally can't. I mean, Sally can bring some people to the table, but she can't bring everybody. You need, if you're going to build new dorms, then you're going to need a coalition, a collaboration, and it's going to come in a variety of ways. It's going to be the private sector. It's going to be the university sector. The city may contribute the land. The city may contribute some planning, but basically investment capital may come from a developer, because the dormitories you're building may be part public, part private. They're mixed use now, and so let's take advantage of what we have. But let's also make sure that the right people are at the table, and the university is at the table in the right way.
Mayor, I appreciate your question. I wish I could answer it because we haven't figured that out. In Minneapolis, we have the same issues, if you will. One of my divisions in my department, our housing division, one of my directors is really doing some really, I think, innovative things around our housing strategy. And we deal with all the affordable housing as well in the city. The problem is, when I was at the university didn't deal with any affordable housing or other kind of housing issues. It was just student housing. That's all they focused on. And it's just a proliferation of student housing right now around the university campus. There are no conversations between the city and the university about the housing needs or a broader strategy that could be addressed that is targeted at the entire community. That conversation doesn't exist right now. And one of the things that I told my colleagues when I left the university and I went to the city of Minneapolis, one of my priorities was going to be to create more collaboration and more transparency around the things that we were doing that certainly were central to the needs of our community around in a number of different areas. But I wish I had an answer for your question, Mayor, but I don't. We haven't figured that out ourselves.
Anyone else?
Thank you both so much for speaking today. It was very interesting. I'm a UIC graduate, so your presentation was especially intriguing to me. Yeah, and also Columbia College Chicago, so I'm very familiar with the University Center and the loop. But Mr. Taylor, you spoke about the importance of privileging community knowledge, of identifying community priorities in moving forward. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how specifically the strategy shifted between your first foray out and the development of the UNP, and also how UROC reverses that flow of knowledge from university-based projects into the community, and sort of what kind of processes you have in place to facilitate that reversal.
Your second question is a big one. I don't think we have enough time. I think, at least in terms of our process, our engagement process, what changed was, again, the sobering reality that, in academia, I think there's, and I said this yesterday in the back seat of the car when I'm riding around with Marva and Sally. I said there's a level of kind of academic snobbery on some level. We think we're all that. And I think the University of Minnesota, because it's such a prominent institution in that community, has a lot of power, economic and otherwise. And it just assumed, we just assumed that, what community wouldn't want us there? Because there were other communities that were vying for our attention. And they actually came to us and said, hey, if they don't want you in their community, please bring that model, that concept to our community. And so, like I said, that was a sobering reality for us that, a community would actually say, and I think we had to come to the realization that their criticism of us was well-founded. It was really well-founded. It was based on a history of the university just kind of doing whatever it thought it wanted to do in the community with no real engagement with the community to say, what do you want? What would you like to see the university do? A lot of what was done was based on researchers working in the community, trying to get papers done. You know the deal. And so the community said, not on a large scale, you're not going to do that here. And so we had to back up and really rethink, okay, how do we position this in a way that the community understands that we would, first of all, be able to bring transformational value to the community, and more importantly, working from the perspective of being a true partner, not taking the lead and not taking the notion that we're going to come in and fix the community, but really understanding that we were equal partners in this venture. And I think that's what helped to really finally get the community to say, okay, we'll take you a little bit more seriously. So, I won't answer the second part of your question.
Thank you for being here. We're talking about the university being an anchor. Well, not only is it an anchor in Iowa City, but in Johnson County, but it's a regional anchor. The #1 employer in the county south of here, which is Washington County, is the University of Iowa. So this is a regional issue, and it affects so many other things besides housing, transportation, hunger, all sorts of different things. As the university grows, its effect on not only the city and the county, but the region is going to be multiplied. And so you live in large regions, but also in urban counties and cities. So what would you suggest the university do, the county and the cities? How best can we start that collaboration, that strategic plan to do what we need to do to make this the greatest place here that we can?
Well, I guess Megan asked the similar question, and I guess I'm going to say that one of the things that the Brookings Institution, the Institute, has brought up, and Bruce Katz in particular, has talked about the notion of city regions. And I think that the notion of the city region is important. But I also think that going back to the University of Minnesota or the University of Iowa can only go so far if the president doesn't say so. Robert and Craig might have bailed, might have gone to it. Craig says they might even have gone to a different neighborhood. Yeah, but Bob said, we're going to basically do it here. And there was one thing I was going to talk about, in essence, regionalism can go so far. If you end up going to regionalism and the politicians will say, hey, look, we can only go so far. We're not going to give up our land use control. We're not going to give up our taxing authority, and so if you figure out a way to handle the regional argument, I think that's important. I think it's also exceedingly important that place be a region. I really think that you can really accomplish some things. Sally was taking us around, and Margot were taking us around to different spots yesterday, and we got way outside beyond the what do you call it, the Pentecrests. I wanted to talk about the Pentateuch, but but then again, I'm in Christie's territory then. And but I really do care about that. And I do care about regionalism, and I do care about place. And I think it's really important that you do that. But it takes a president to basically say, bring those counties together. And so you're going to have to bring your president along, I think.
I'd also like to mention that the Federal Reserve Bank has become much more involved in this area in the last several years. And one of the things that we've observed through our research is that this is becoming a major region. It's sort of been marketed as the IDEA corridor, but it reaches from north of Cedar Rapids all the way down to Iowa City and below. And so there's an employment hub that encompasses all those communities. So there's transportation issues, there are many other issues, economic development. Is Iowa City willing to compete with Cedar Rapids for the new XYZ company? Or is there a way to cooperate and to collaborate on those kinds of things? And so I think the nonprofit community is really key to this. The economic development agencies, your chambers of commerce, as well as the university and other nonprofits to look at the entire region instead of looking at sort of discrete localities that are competing with each other and increasing their economic development incentives. And, you know, we've all heard that that's a race to the bottom. Yes.
Hi everyone, I'm Sherry. I work with Habitat for Humanity right here in the corridor. We cover 4 counties, and you're speaking about nonprofits, and I would just like to bring a little attention to something that we're doing right. This is the 9th year that the Tippie College of Business at the University of Iowa has joined us in a sponsorship to build the 9th home for a working class family to become homeowners. And not only am I volunteer coordinator with our affiliate, but also my family built our Habitat home back in 2007. So we're talking about empowerment, self-reliance, building stability for our homes, getting our families out of the rental situation where they're moving every 2 years. That's the average. And really providing some sustainability. So when we talk about what our vision is for community, I think we really need to give the University of Iowa a lot of credit for the sponsorship through the Tippie College of Business, which has already been happening successfully for almost a decade. And we're really proud of that. It feels like we're just putting a small dent into the extreme need for affordable housing, but we're doing something now, and we've been doing it for almost 2 decades in a collaborative situation. And we can do more. We could do more sponsorships of this type with different colleges, with different departments through the University of Iowa. It really comes down to education and to funding. We're building about 5 to 7 homes in our 4 counties every year. We want to do more, but we're a nonprofit. We're an NGO. We don't get government funds. We really have to work collaboratively with our community, and it's really about getting the word out about the good work that we do. Certainly one thing to recognize is that when people are surveyed across our nation, they typically identify things like food, water, clothing as your human necessities. Shelter is rarely noticed or mentioned by most American citizens. So we can do better with education. We also need to realize that here in the Midwest, we have a real culture of self-reliance and pride, and a lot of folks feel like they should be able to do it themselves and are very frustrated right now that they can't. They can't provide for their family the way their dad or their grandpa did. And we can do more to advocate politically, but also just realizing that the nonprofits really do need funding. We've got to get the word out. Iowa nonprofit workers are the 2nd most poorly paid in the nation. That's because our culture says we shouldn't need you. But we do all need each other, and we can look at these types of collaborations that really are working well. And so I just wanted to give some credit there to the University of Iowa. We're doing some things right. We just need to amp up the funding, amp up the partnerships, and really decide what our vision is.
Okay, I'm going to move to the other side of the room.
Go over, go.
Catherine.
Hello, I'm Catherine Dorsey, and my employer is the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine. And I'm here learning a lot about how to do population health right. The changes that are happening in healthcare and in healthcare financing is that we're no longer going to be paid for how many operations we do, how many MRIs we do, how many office visits we do. The big funders, including the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, is working to change that model to the ideal, will probably happen, I don't know, 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road. We're going to measure how healthy the population is, And if the population is healthy, you shall get paid. If the population is not healthy, you shall be penalized. That's different. We can no longer have this dogfight of who's going to move into what market share and who's going to have the biggest, fastest equipment. And so now we're talking health disparities. Health disparities are the same as the income disparities. Affordable housing, all the research is pointing to, if you have insecure housing, you have bad health. Well, eventually the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics are really going to care about that. If that's causing you to be unhealthy, then they really need to look at what's called the upstream determinants of health. So I appreciate being here. I am learning a lot. Definitely learning how to form the right partnerships, how to do the right collaborations, because that is where it's moving, is for the health of the entire population. Any suggestions would be welcome, I guess, would be my question.
And perhaps you could hear from others here today, also later today.
Do you gentlemen, my name's Bob Welsh.
Yes.
Do you gentlemen have any suggestions? It seems to me that the universities are concerned about housing for students. You know, Mayor's mentioned about the development south of Burlington here. Developers can make a heck of a lot more money off of student housing than they can for senior housing. What's the university's role at that point? You know, we have many employees at the university that can't afford to live here. You know, we have a heck of a lot of the people that work at the university hospital cannot afford to live in Iowa City. What's your suggestion at that point? I mean, you know, because developers want to make money. And how in the heck do we do that? Because, you know, you take the area south of Burlington here in Iowa City. What better place for seniors to be able to live? For people with disabilities to be able to live? But that's not what we're having. That's not what we're going to get. Unless the university and the city both really step up. Any comments?
I mean, you raise a great question. Again, it's one that we had many discussions about in our own city. Again, at the University of Minnesota, there was no conversation about housing beyond that which accommodated students. No conversation about housing for faculty or staff, or for the members of the surrounding community. That was just not a discussion. At the city, of course, we do have programs in place that support affordable housing, that support senior housing. And you know, at some point, it's certainly my hope that there will be some dialogue between the city and the university about how do we collaborate to address the housing needs in general. Like you said, it's a business for development. And typically developers that are coming to the city talking about building residential housing, they're looking for city resources to do that. TIF, you know, other finance, special financing, bonds. Universities don't have those resources. So developers that are approaching universities to build housing are looking to make a profit. Developers that are approaching the city to talk about the kinds of housing opportunities that you spoke of, again, are looking to leverage city resources to be able to do that. But you know, again, I'm optimistic that at some point that the university and the city will have an opportunity to really engage in some collaborative discussions, innovative discussions about how we do this together.
So we have time for one more question before we end. Is there anyone else with a burning question?
Hi, my name is Carolyn Dyer. I'm familiar with the neighborhood around the University of Pennsylvania, where the university has provided funds for forgivable loans for down payment assistance and for renovation of housing in the neighborhood of the university. And I'm wondering, Mr. Perry, if you could talk about how that kind of a relationship gets started. The University of Pennsylvania is a private university. We're talking here about a public university. I know some public universities do similar things. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I guess I can, and I'll blend that with Mr. Welch's question earlier as well, because I think that one of the things that public universities, research universities can do, is that they have the ability, and you have an inclusive zone, you have an inclusive act right now, an inclusion act in housing, and it's the first of its kind, and it's a statewide act. I think that quite frankly, the city and the county, and I would say Megan's region, would be such that you could actually increase the amount of inclusionary zoning that you're basically talking about, and I think that's one thing that could be done, and we could do it you could do it at a regional level, and the second thing that I would do is that you're talking of employer-assisted housing. EAH is the acronym, and I think there are different models, including the one that was started at the University of Pennsylvania. And I think in some ways EAH legislation is easier to accomplish at the private sector universities than it is at the public sector universities. And so the University of Pennsylvania gets a lot of credit, but basically it's in a relatively small area, and it's in a small spatial area as well. And I'll leave it there. But basically, the amount of money that the EAH is putting out is not a significant amount of money either. Yeah.
So I'd like to thank you all for coming today. This last 24 hours or so have been such a great opportunity to focus on community issues. And, you know, a lot of work has occurred already, so we don't want to make it seem as if we haven't been doing anything, because we know that some very important challenges have been addressed, and the new inclusionary zoning, which hopefully will be approved by the city within the next few weeks, will be a great tool in your toolbox. You know, this is a long-term process. Looking at affordable housing, community development, healthcare, and other issues really takes a lot of trust and development of partnerships with lots of different organizations, because no one organization can do it all. So thank you so much for coming today. I hope that this has given you some ideas, some thoughts about how you might engage in the future. The Federal Reserve Bank is here to help you. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact us. As I said before, there are articles in the back. I refuse to take them back to Chicago, so please remember to pick those up on your way out.
Yeah,
I'd like to thank Craig Taylor and David Perry so much for their participation in this program today, and also Sally and the other members of the Housing Task Force, or the
Obermann working.
The
Thank
Obermann
you.
Working Group.
Thank you, the working group. Thank you so much for all of your help. And I believe Craig has some comments he'd like to make.
Yeah, I just wanted to, the young lady who asked me the question about UROC, I didn't mean to cut off her question. If you're still here, I'll answer your question. You and I can talk, but it's a long answer to that the second part of her question. So if you're still here, I'm more than happy to talk with you in private about that.
Thank you very much.